In 1961, Kurt Vonnegut gave us the short story Harrison Bergeron. It tells of a dystopian future America where all citizens are forced to be equal through handicaps. Smart people are forced to wear thought-impairing devices. Strong people are forced to wear heavy weights. Beautiful people are forced to wear ugly masks, and so forth. At a glance, it appears to be a story lambasting ideologies of equality. After all, people can't ever truly be equal. But that wasn't actually Vonnegut's point. He was trying to be more subliminal, satirizing the American perception of socialism at the time. As being so extreme, that's what socialism was imagined to be like. But where Vonnegut was trying to write against overreaction to political ideology, some liberals today are threatening to take a satire and turn it into reality through their dangerous tunnel vision focus on identity politics. Identity politics are defined as a tendency for people of a particular religion, race, social background, or so forth, to form exclusive political alliances, moving away from traditional broad-based party politics. Like most things in life, identity politics can be a force for good or evil. In a country plagued by party politics and gridlock, social groups can form powerful, positive coalitions, which force those in power to sit up and listen to their movement, reestablishing the direction of government to tackle the needs of the people. When the United States was founded, it was a nation that used slave labor, segregated almost entirely on the basis of race, and did not support the right of women to vote. The true American citizen was a white, land-owning male adult. This exclusive American identity has been defended over the past 2 centuries by conservatives who, being largely white and male, chose to fight for the status quo over equality. And they came up against liberals, who led the charge for inclusion, fighting for the emancipation of slaves, for women's suffrage, for desegregated schools and neighborhoods, and many other pushes towards inclusion and a more diverse American identity. Liberals understood that for the growth and development of a society, you have to focus on equality and especially equal opportunity. After all, in societies where certain demographics are subjugated, that society loses out on that part of its population being able to contribute. In essence, if you have a room full of 100 people, and all of them share the same problem, but you dictate that only 20 of them, or 50, or 3, or 88, for example, are allowed to work on the problem, you're not really being smart about your situation. You maximize your ability to solve the problem when all 100 people are given the power and opportunity to address it. But historically, conservatives denied this line of thinking and used identity politics as a tool for exclusion. Now, liberal overreaction to conservative identity politics are causing them to commit the same sin, whereas before, liberal thought was more meritocratic. Who you were didn't define you, but what you achieved. It has since bent over backwards, and now who you are and how you define yourself matters more than anything else about you. And that goes for everyone else too. The righteous leftist struggle against labels has completely flipped, and now the fight for inclusion has become so much less about pursuing equality and so much more about special treatment. This goes right back to the dangerous measure of a person's worth by their identity, which had plagued the right wing for so long, only this time traditional identity values are inverted. The white supremacist assumes that the black man has nothing of value to say because he as a black man is inferior. The misogynist assumes that the woman has nothing of value to say because she as a woman is inferior. Now, the regressive liberal assumes that the person of privilege, whether they're white or straight or a man or whichever part of their identity is privileged according to the topic, that person has nothing of value to say because as someone privileged, they cannot speak as truly and honestly on the issues as someone living the issue themselves, real or imagined. On race, a black man is more worth listening to than a white man, just on the basis of his skin color. On sex, a non-straight person over a straight person. On gender, a woman or hermaphrodite or gender fluid over a cisgender, and so forth. Despite any knowledge, experience, or approach one may be able to share in the discussion of equality, this is where we depart slightly from Harrison Bergeron, because 1, that story is about forced equality, and regressive leftists have instead taken up a position of inverting traditional inequality. And 2, Harrison Bergeron was all about observable identities and abilities, whereas regressive leftists care solely about identities and not so much ability. Still, the story remains an applicable warning against extremism over equality. This whole time I've been talking in the abstract, so now I want to give some real-world examples of this kind of identity-based thinking. The first I want to talk about is mansplaining, which is defined as explaining something to someone, typically a man to a woman, in a manner regarded as condescending or patronizing. At the surface level, this sounds fine and fair. Nobody likes being talked down to or patronized. But if you give some brain power to even the slightest amount of critical thinking, the question should come to you. If nobody likes to be the recipient of a condescending explanation, then why do we need to involve gender in the context? The word mansplain came about in 2008. Before that, no identity-specific splaining word was ever necessary to describe when somebody was being patronizing. This is a word clearly meant to divide, and there are others like it now, such as white-splaining, which refers to a white person being patronizing to a person of color. As these words sprout up, how many do we need? Should we also create adult-splaining, which is when adults are patronizing to kids, or mechanic-splaining, when a mechanic is patronizing to a customer who actually knows a lot about cars? Or can we chalk all of these up to people simply being condescending, unaware jerks? As Lindsay Dodge writes in an opinion piece for the libertarian site thoughtsonliberty.com, the more we dement language to create distinctions between men and women, the more we fight against our own cause that individuals, including women, are created equal and deserve the same respect. By creating a gendered word, we contribute to the unequal and ungendered view of people's actions, and therefore of people themselves. Personally speaking, I can only offer one real context in which I see mansplaining being a word used appropriately and meaningfully, and that is when a man without knowledge or experience tries to lecture a woman about experiences that only women go through, such as pregnancy or periods. Unless a man is a doctor or someone with proper knowledge and qualifications about those experiences, I would probably tolerate the word mansplaining. I would never accuse, however, a female doctor of womansplaining when giving a talk about prostate cancer, as an example. Hopefully you can see my rules of engagement here. From mansplaining, I want to shift over towards a scenario where white-splaining might be invoked, but more importantly, it's a conversation where a rational, fact-based, macro-level discussion is deliberately hijacked by claims of intellectual and moral superiority based on personal experience and identity. The conversation I'm talking about is the one that took place between black comedian Hannibal Buress and Sam Harris, a white writer, philosopher, and neuroscientist. The conversation is lengthy, but sound bites and quotations have already been pulled from it and shared in several public spaces online by listeners. The conversation, which is about the relationship between race and police brutality, eventually breaks down into Hannibal Buress claiming that his feelings as a black man are more meaningful than any facts or statistics relative to the discussion. He characterizes Sam Harris as being part of the privileged white elite, only able to judge from afar, but having no understanding of life on the streets, where Hannibal is from. Afterwards, Sam Harris spoke about the argument on his own podcast, and did his best to push some understanding, because Hannibal was apparently fairly drunk at the time. But the trumping of feelings over facts is nothing new to the regressive left. Newt Gingrich may have exemplified the right's own obsession with feelings over facts in an interview with CNN, but regressives are making the same mistake. This is nowhere more prevalent than the Black Lives Matter movement, which has undermined itself through the dismissal of facts in aggressive, divisive representation, as the Amazing Atheist covered extensively in his video here. And in comments like this one, we can see how some liberals are fixed on alienating people based on racial identity, even to the point of being Uncle Toms. A final example I want to move on to is the use of safe spaces to enforce bigotry of one identity against others. The general concept of safe spaces isn't very radical. For example, we expect that Facebook is a kind of safe space, and that we believe we will not be subjected to any extreme porn, gore, or other shocking content, because Facebook does not promote, in fact it actively forbids, that kind of content being shared through it. So there is merit in the concept of safe spaces, but certain liberal movements have come to view their feelings as something not just to defend, but for which to actively fight. Case in point, the harassment of student journalist Tim Tye at the University of Missouri. During a protest, students formed a safe space of their own on campus grounds, and when journalists came to record what was going on, some students formed walls or surrounded reporters, most noticeably Tim Tye. The students berate him, and several times students push him or try to grab him to stop him from taking pictures. And here I would like to include a piece by The Atlantic about the incident. They have one lone student surrounded. They're forcibly preventing him from exercising a civil right. At various points they intimidate him. Ultimately, they physically push him. All the while, they are operating on the premise, or carrying on the pretense, that he is making them feel unsafe. It's as if they've weaponized the concept of safe spaces. I support people creating safe spaces as a shield by exercising their freedom of association to organize themselves into mutually supporting communities, Ken White wrote prior to this controversy. But not everyone imagines safe spaces like that. Some use the concept of safe spaces as a sword, wielded to annex public spaces and demand that people within those spaces conform to their private norms. A Twitter account associated with the activists defended the students' actions, saying, "It's typically white media who don't understand the importance of respecting black spaces." In essence, then, this wielding of safe spaces was just a chance to engage in mob justice on the basis of identity politics. We are one identity, we perceive you as a separate, incompatible identity, and so we will violate your rights and bully you. Just consider that comparison to angry white neighbors who intimidate the black family that just moved into the neighborhood. Liberals fought against that kind of behavior for so long. Those whites should be more open-minded and inclusive. There's nothing harmful about the black family moving in. But this lone journalist is harmful. He's part of the enemy, and he deserves to be threatened and assaulted until we frighten or anger him enough for him to leave for good. Then our neighborhood, our safe space, can go back to being pure. Just like the white neighborhood and the black family, we have a group which is frustrated with race relations, but their words and actions only end up worsening those relations through exclusivity. In the end, their safe space becomes a weapon for identity politics. They don't know it, but the true liberal progressives of the past and present are rolling in their graves. These regressives need to get back to their roots of inclusion, tolerance, and understanding. The civil rights movement succeeded because it was ultimately founded on the love of all mankind, not hatred of people who were different or didn't understand. We cannot ignore individual identity, because some parts of society are unequal across demographic lines, and that should be acknowledged for the sake of addressing those inequalities. But likewise, overinflating the importance of identity will only contribute further to that inequality and demographic divide. The neighborhood isn't all white, straight, and mainstream anymore. In fact, it's the opposite. But now, a white, mainstream family shows up with a moving van and starts unpacking. Liberals will have to decide what kind of neighbors they will be. Will they be aggressive and exclusive? Perhaps they will be welcoming, but patronizing. Ideally, they will choose to do what they were always fighting for others to do: treat them equally.